Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar in the Working Smarter series. Today I will talk about repeating item groups. My name is Johannes Molin and I'm a product manager here at Viedoc Technologies. You might have seen my name in the past. Warm welcome to this webinar. Before we get started, I just want to clarify some logistics here. This webinar is being recorded. We will distribute the recording in a couple of weeks. Feel free to post any questions in the Q&A during the webinar. If we have time, we will take a look at these questions at the end. If we don't have time for all questions, we will still distribute all the questions and answers in the follow-up. And in case you experience any technical difficulties, please raise this in the chat and we have tech support that will help you with this. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. I will first give a very brief background on repeating item groups, and I will then do a form comparison. I will talk a little bit about some key metrics before using repeating item groups and then after. Then I will move into the system, and I'm planning to spend most of my time in this webinar in the system to show you what it would look like in Designer, in Clinic. So at the end, I will also look at some limitations we have to be transparent with this when you start using repeating item groups on your own. Okay, so let's take a quick look at some background. If you have used other systems, you're probably well aware of the benefits repeating item groups could bring. If you have worked only with Viedoc, you might ask why this would be important. Viedoc can already support repetitive data collection through repeating forms or common events that we typically use to collect adverse events and medications and so on. Also, we support recurring events and unscheduled events, which can also be used to collect this repetitive data structures. But we do lack today a good way to collect repetitive data structures within a form. This is still something that is requiring the designer to set up many unique items within a form. This is, of course, taking a lot of time for the designer, and this could also lead to sort of the unintuitive workflows when entering the data in Viedoc Clinic, as well as when reviewing the export data. So what I'm hoping to show you is the benefits that we will bring with repeating item groups. The designer will be able to build studies quicker, but not only the build, also the validation and modification of these forms. You can also use more flexible designs. You have more options when designing a form, and it will be a bit more intuitive as well. For the data entry user, it will definitely be more intuitive, and again, you have more options on how to collect the data. And speaking about exports and reports, you will see that these new export structures will be more readable and more intuitive, so it would be easier for any reviewer to look at the export and get an overview of the data. It will also require less effort to convert data to STTM format. So let's take a look at the sample form. Before I move into the system, I'm just going to show you a couple of metrics. This is actually from a real study, or not from a real study, but from a template study of ours. So it's a real design. The old way of designing this form would mean setting up 21 unique item groups and 186 unique items. And you can see in this image here that we have a lot of items and a lot of item groups. And you can see the indication to the right that I can only see the top part of this form. And looking at zooming out the image so that I can see the full form, you can see that this is a lot of items, a lot of expressions or validation checks, a lot of extra effort to configure all this. Now, if I use a repeating item group instead, I will be able to design this form in a completely different way. It will be sufficient to use 2 unique item groups, and I will be able to get it down to 15 unique items for the same form. And the number of expressions will be reduced to just 5. So it's very easy to see that, yes, this will require less effort when designing the form, when validating the form, and also if you need to do modifications of the form. So for that reason, we are extremely excited to be at the sort of the verge of releasing repeating item groups. It will be released in 4.92 starting next week. So okay, I will in a minute move into the system and show you what it actually looks like when I'm working in Designer and Clinic. But before doing that, I just want to briefly mention what I will show you in the demo. So I will start with demonstrating a fixed structure, and I will explain what that is in just a minute. I'll start in Designer, I'll then move on to Clinic, and then I will show you some examples of the exports, and then talk a little bit about how reports is affected as well. Then I will show a dynamic structure and talk about that in Designer and Clinic. And finally, I will show some additional capabilities in how to use expressions and different alternatives you have in your configuration, as well as using reference data scope setup. Okay, so bear with me as I move into the system, and I will start in Viedoc Designer, where I have the study prepared. I will open my design and I will go to a form where I have prepared a fixed structure of a repeating item group. So open, or actually, let me take that back. I'll start with showing you the hematology form the way it used to be designed. So this is the design we used before. And here you can see with your own eyes all these item groups and all these items individually set up with different IDs, different expressions. Very easy to make mistakes when you try to sort of copy this forward. So very time consuming to configure, validate, and then to modify in case someone wants to change this. The way it will look now, if I open the repeating version, is like this. For now, you can ignore this static text here in red. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I want to show you is this specific item group here. So we now have a new option saying allow group to repeat. And you have the possibility to set number of occurrences. So this example has minimum 17 and maximum 17, which means it's a fixed structure. Whenever this appears in Viedoc Clinic, it will always have 17 occurrences. There is a max limit here, and that's 50. So you will be able to repeat an item group up to 50 times. In this specific item group, I've also done some changes with the unit dropdown here. Since I'm now only using one item group, I've combined all the unit options in one dropdown. And I've also selected to use a dropdown to populate the name of the analytes. I will talk about that a little bit later and why I've chosen to do so. Before moving to Clinic, I also want to highlight that we have the ID of the item group, and it's now possible to modify. This was not possible in the past. which meant you had to live with the system-generated item group IDs. And I will explain why this is quite useful now when we have the repeating item groups. So, okay, I will move to Viedoc Clinic, and I will launch as an investigator. And I will start with just opening the form that you have seen in the past, the non-repeating hematology form, set up with unique item groups and unique items. You can see there is some space between the item groups, but otherwise it's all the 17 item groups listed here. And I will now compare this with what it would look like when using the repeating item groups. So here you can see that some of the spacing between the item groups have been removed. We also have a number to make it easier to enter data and for the reviewer as well, which occurrence this is in the item group. And at the very end of the form, it will look the same. You have no options to add additional recurrences. You have no option to remove any either, since we are using a fixed structure. So there will always be 17 occurrences of this item group. This time I've coupled this with the reference data editor, which will work as well, but I will get back and talk a little bit more about this a little later. So, okay, in Clinic, this works fine. What about the exports? What will happen with the exports now when we are using repeating item groups? Well, let me show you that. So first of all, I'll move back to the landing page and to the export view. And I can start with saying that there will be a new export version in 492. The new export version will just include a few new columns in a few datasets. It's related to the queries datasets and also to the coding datasets, where you will see two new columns added for item group ID and item group sequence number. This is just to make sure that if there is a query in a specific occurrence of a repeating item group, you can, from the query dataset, figure out where exactly that query is. But in addition to this new export version, there are other options introduced as well. Or there is one more option introduced as well. And that you can see here in the output format, repeating item groups as a separate form. So if we look first at the old structure, the way we used to do it before 492, if we use the old way of designing the form with unique items, you would have what we refer to as a short and fat export. It will be dragged out horizontally with all these unique items. And if you wanted to make a quick review of something, perhaps to see, did this subject have any values out of range at this visit? And was it clinically significant? Well, it's kind of cumbersome to do that because of this sort of short and fat structure. Now, if you use our new default structure, you will export repeating item groups as a separate form. So if I take a quick look at how that would look, you would still have your routine form, your regular form, but you will have the item group exported as its own data set here. And then you will see that you will be able to differentiate the different occurrences with this new repeat key, the item group repeat key. This will also mean that for a specific subject or a specific visit, you will be able to review the data in a much easier way because all the analytes will be lined up in one column, and you can easily see, well, do we have any values out of range? Was it clinically significant or not? So this can significantly simplify the review of data. If you, for some reason, really prefer the old way of doing it with a short and fat structure, and you still want to use repeating item groups, there is also an option for you. You can simply just disable this option here, and then you will sort of stick to the old structure. The way repeats or occurrences of the repeating item group will be displayed then is with $16 here for the 16 repeats. So that will keep the short and fat structure, but you would still just use the ID, dollar, and a number. Good for you to know ahead of the 492 release is that the reports tool will initially use this structure. So if you're using repeating item groups right away after 492, this is also the way it will be displayed in Viedoc reports. But in a release in the near future, we will change this behavior to use our new default export option, meaning repeating item groups are exported as a separate form. So for that reason, I would also encourage you to be a little bit cautious when designing custom reports based on repeating item groups data right now. And I would rather wait for the new structure. Otherwise, you will need to redo some work after the release when we change this. So these export options are, of course, supported here in the UI that I've showed you, but they are also supported when you're exporting data through the API. So it's repeating item groups are supported in all export formats, both through the UI and the API. Okay, so that was the fixed structure. Let's take another example and let's look at an example of dynamic structure. So I will take another form. I will use a vital signs form in this case. Here again, I have set this item group here to repeat. You can see this with the repeat icon to the left here, indicating that this is a repeating item group. This is, by the way, also what is being displayed in the preview. And if you're generating like an annotated CRF, remember that is displaying what we have in Designer. So for that reason, all occurrences of a repeating item group will not be displayed, but this icon will be displayed. So here for this item group, I have decided to give a different minimum and a maximum number. So minimum 1, max 10. So this is a dynamic item group. And I will show you what that looks like in Viedoc Clinic. So perhaps this is a scenario where, according to your protocol, you are expected to record these details at least once, but depending on different situations for the subject or during the visit, you might need to re-record this additional times. So if I go back to Viedoc Clinic and I launch again as an investigator, and I go to this specific form, you can see that I have the first instance showing right away. So the minimum number will sort of be the default number shown, and I can never remove occurrences below that number. However, I will be able to add more occurrences. Since the maximum was 10, I can continue to add new rows until I reach the maximum. When I add a new row, you see that I can also now remove the last row. So I'm not able to remove a row in the middle or from the start, but I can always remove the last row. So for the site users, it's very simple to enter data in these structures as well. They can easily add new rows or remove rows within the configured boundaries that you have set in Designer. You might wonder about the term to use a row here. You might think that the correct way would be to say add new item group, but we made the call that it is easier for the site user, the ones entering the data, if we call this row instead of an item group that they might not know exactly what it is. So yes, here you have a dynamic structure. In the export, the dynamic structure will behave just as the static structure. So there is no difference there in terms of exports. Okay, let's go back to Designer to look at some special cases or how we can use expressions. So again, I will move back to my hematology form, because here I am actually using a few expressions. So I'll open the result item. These might be a bit silly, the examples, but this is just to demonstrate how you can work with an item group repeat key to customize different occurrences of this item group. So if I look at the result item here and I move to validation checks, you can see that one check I have added goes for this specific item ID, saying that this value should be less than 2000. This will now be valid for all occurrences. So for all the 17 repeats, we'll have this specific edit check. However, if I want to be specific and say that it should only be valid for a specific repeat, I can write my edit check and I can use the item group repeat key to sort of single out this specific repeat. So this edit check would mean that a repeat number 4 has to be less than 1000. And in a similar way, I'm also using the item group repeat key for static text here. So I have a visibility condition saying that if, let's see if we can, if this specific item and the first instance is greater than 500, then we should trigger this specific text. So if I quickly just open the form in Clinic again, we can take a look at that right away. All right, 550 here, you see the visibility condition is triggering. I'll say for another one here, 1500, nothing is happening. I go to repeat number 4, 1500, while the edit check is firing. I take another example with the check that should always trigger, and that does that as well. So you have the flexibility to sort of customize each occurrence by using these item group repeat keys. I also talked a little bit initially about the use of expressions here for the analyte name. In the old way of doing this, we typically used a free text field, and we used an expression for each individual free text field to say populate this text. Here I've instead used a dropdown, and I've added all my analytes, the names of the analytes from 1 to 17, and I've chosen to use a numeric code list value here. And the reason is just that my expression will be so simple when doing this. All I will need to do is say return item group repeat key. That means when the item group repeat key is 1, this analyte will be displayed. When the repeat key is 2, this one will be displayed, and so on. And you can also see the results of that here in the form when it's opened. Another advantage of using the dropdown is also that the configuration of the reference data scope is so much easier. So if I close this one and I'll leave this design and I'll go to the global design settings instead and jump to the reference data scopes. You have probably been used to see a long list of values here in the reference data scope. Now, this is very different. Here it is enough to just configure one variable like this. I'm using the ID for the lab test. And here I've used the dynamic variable type. So setup of reference data scope is significantly smoother now with repeating item groups, and it can be done very quickly as well. There are like similar benefits to the data mapping if you are importing data. So repeating item groups, well, we support importing data to repeating item groups as well. Regardless if you are importing directly through the API, if you're using our import application, or if you are uploading ODM data in Viedoc admin. Either of those will support import of repeating item group data. One note to be aware of, the import application is updated in 492 to support this item group repeat key. So if you're planning to import data to repeating item groups and you are using the import application, make sure you download the latest version. Okay, so there is one more example I will go back and show you, and that's a completely different form. It's a physical examination form. Basically, it's just one more example of what you could do and how you could treat the repeating item group. Here you can see another example where I've used a repeating item group. In this case, I've used a fixed structure, so 9 repeats. Again, I've used a dropdown to trigger the body systems checked because the expression is so simple that way. But here I have opted not to use a label to these items. Instead, I've added a static text above. For this static text, I've added a visibility condition to say that it should only be displayed when the item group repeat key is 1. And the result of that is just a slightly different layout to the form. And I will open this here. So you still have this sort of condensed form. You have the numbers here lined up, but you could see that the labels here, well, it's actually not labels, it's the static text, but they are displayed only on the first occurrence. So then you get an even more compact view, which some users might prefer. Of course, pros and cons of using it this way, many users will probably prefer to have the label displayed on every occurrence, but I just want to show you an alternative and how you can customize your group using these repeat keys. Also, you should keep in mind that with these conditions, they will not be displayed in the annotated CRF. Okay, so I've shown you here a fixed structure. What if you have a combination? You want to populate some values, but you also want the site to be able to add some body systems of their own if they want to do additional checks. So in theory, you can use another repeating item group so that you have 2. That would, however, create another data set since each repeating item group is exported in a separate form. So an option to that is to design the form slightly different and perhaps something like this. So what I've done here is that I've kept everything the way it was with the drop down and the 9 suggested body systems here. But here I've used a dynamic structure saying that the minimum is 9. So it will never be less than 9. And the maximum is 14. So the user is able to add 5 more. And then I have used, again, the item group repeat key in a visibility condition to say that this item will only be displayed if the item group repeat key is less than 10. And of course, the other way around for the free text option, where I'm saying in a visibility condition that it will only be displayed if the item group repeat key is greater than 9. And the resulting form in Viedoc Clinic will then look like this. You have your 9 default options, but you still have the possibility to add new rows like this. And here I've been a bit picky, so I'm using the exact same width for these 2 different items, the drop down and the free text. So here I can add my own records up to the configured maximum. Like this. And you can see once I reach the maximum, I'm no longer able to add new rows. And of course, I can only remove rows down to the minimum again. So this is one option on how you can combine this, the functions here and also some free text options. Keep in mind, of course, that these 2 items, they are different items. So even if this item group is exported as a separate form or separate data set, it will still be 2 columns in the data set. Okay. Let's see. So I will move back to the presentation again. And yes, I've covered the fixed structure in the demo. I covered a dynamic structure, and I talked about some additional capabilities as well. And now let's look at some of the limitations, just to be transparent with this so that you know what to expect. So repeating item groups are being released in Viedoc 4.92. And 4.92, well, we start releasing this already next week with the US instance, then Europe, and then followed by Japan and China. So very soon you will be able to test repeating item groups on your own. From the initial release, you will not be able to use it in Viedoc Coder. This is work in progress, so in the near future, you will be able to use coding for terms that have been collected in repeating item. But it's not supported from 4.92. And also what I mentioned with Viedoc reports, it will not use the new default export structure, the one with where the repeating item group is exported as a separate form. But that work is in progress. So again, be a little bit careful with spending time on creating custom reports right now for repeating item groups. I would advise you to wait a bit with that unless it's something you desperately need right now. But this is also work in progress and is something that is planned for the near future. Next, repeating item groups are not supported in Viedoc Me. You can also not use repeating item groups in randomization or kit allocation. And then, as I mentioned, when I was logged into Designer, you will not be able to see individual recurrences of the repeating item groups in form prints. The form print is basically printing what you have in Designer, so you will still be able to see the icon of this item group is repeating, but you will not see every individual repeat. And the same thing with the form preview. You would be able to see that this is a repeating item group, but not the individual recurrences. And finally, as I also showed you in Viedoc Clinic, data entry users are only able to remove the last row in Viedoc Clinic. So there might be a scenario where a user wants to remove something higher up in the table, so to say. They would either need to delete their way up there or just shift the records and shift place and then remove the last row. So that's a current limitation. So to summarize here, from Viedoc 492, Viedoc will have support for repeating item groups, compliant with CDISC standards by using the item group repeat key. Designers will be able to build studies with less effort, while still having the flexibility to use expressions for customized functions, visibility conditions, and validation checks. And also, I should mention that in Designer, this will also be supported for when comparing design versions and when generating a configuration report and so on. In Clinic, data entry staff can add and remove repeats very easily within the configured boundaries. So in a very intuitive way, if you have sometimes before tried the workaround where you have another item sort of dictating how many item groups that will appear, you know that is very error prone. So now we have a very simple way of managing this, which will be very smooth and easy for the site users. And last but not least, the reviewers can now also use a new export structure to make the review of this repetitive data a lot easier. It will be much easier to get an overview of the data, and you can sort of filter and search much easier. Also, it will require less effort to transform the data to STTM standards towards the end. And I showed you a couple of forms, a vital signs form, physical examination, lab forms, but you can of course use this in other forms as well. So these were just a few examples. And yeah, the repeating item groups feature is supported in all export formats and both through the UI and the API. Currently, we are working on updating the template studies so that you will see how we are using this, what we consider to be best practice, both when it comes to design of the specific forms, how to use expressions, but also how to work with this for the reference data scope configuration and mapping of imports and so on. So these will be updated shortly, not in time for the 492 release, but we are working on those as well. And meanwhile, of course, if you have any questions about how to set this up, you can reach out to the support. So with this, Viedoc now supports repeating data structures in a wide variety of ways. We support repeating item groups, repeating forms, recurring events, common events, and also the unscheduled events. So now you have many different ways of handling this repetitive data structures. Perfect. So thank you. That was the plan for today. And I'll quickly take a look at the questions we have in the chat. So bear with me here. Yes, there is one. The first question here I see is about the release of when this will be released. I think I mentioned this in the second part of my talk, but we will start releasing this already on Monday. So for the US instance, 492 will be released on Monday. and then we will follow with Europe, Japan, and then China. So you can find all the specific dates on our webpage where you find the release notes. Also, might be good for you to know, sometimes we have people like waiting for a specific release, and even during the day, they ask repeatedly, was it released yet? Was it released yet? And I can just give you an advice here. Whenever you are logged in to Viedoc, and actually even before logging in, let me show you like this. So already from the landing page, you will see which version we're using here. And this is also something you will see even before logging in. So you will never need to ask us if it was released yet. You will always just be able to go to the login page and you will be able to see for yourself if it's been released or not. Okay, taking a look at some other questions. Okay, one question about my warning here for Viedoc reports, what to be cautious about. Actually, the way you are using Viedoc reports right now is fine. We are introducing a breaking change in the reports, and the only difference here from before 492 to after 492 is the introduction of these two new columns here in the queries dataset and the coding dataset. This will not impact the standard reports. It would only impact custom reports if you have used a way of configuring your script so that you're assuming that a certain column is placed in a certain position. So adding these new columns here, well, we have unique IDs for them. So if you have used unique IDs in your custom report scripts, you don't need to worry about the 492 release. Then, looking ahead, we recommend that you're a bit cautious with creating new custom reports based on data collected in repeating item groups. Because if you would do that after 492, you would need to use this structure where we refer to the items this way. So this is the only way you can do it with the custom reports after 492 to use with repeating item groups. But this will change, and I'm not able to say now in exactly which release, but in the near future, this will change so that the data sets used will instead look like this, where you have this tall and skinny format for the repeating item groups. Okay, I see there are a lot of questions and a lot of interest for this new feature, which makes me very happy and makes us very happy, of course. We hope that you will like this as much as we do. I will not have time to answer more questions now, but we will make sure to collect all the questions you have, answer them, and provide you with the responses within the next couple of weeks. So with that, thanks a lot for listening. Hope you like this new feature, and see you again next time. Thank you.